Thank you. And again, for our record, if you could state your name and organisation, please.
Yes, so Oliver Howes, Principal Consultant at TRL.
Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the opportunity today. TRL's mission is to create clean and efficient transport that is safe, reliable and accessible. We're currently running a task force across industry, academia and authorities focused on the curbside and the importance of managing it well for the benefit of everyone. When I talk about the curbside, I mean the areas and locations adjacent to the curbs being the demarcation lines between the footways, the roads and the cycle paths. There's no minister for the curbside and no clear owner. However, the space is used and exploited by a vast range of users, and it impacts on every mode of transport and every member of the UK multiple times a day, from walkers, cyclists, motorised users travelling through spaces. Everyone needs to use this space in some way. It doesn't just impact the transport industry, though. The curbside has an impact on the way people live, from meeting friends on the pavement, dining out on our streets and footways, posting mail, and street entertainment. So many aspects of our daily lives are affected by how the curbsides are used and managed. Over the last decade, the demand on the curbside has changed dramatically. For example, the increase in online shopping has led to a huge increase in last-mile delivery services, the need to charge electric vehicles, and also an uptake in active travel. At the same time, the traditional use of the curbside remain, like parking and HGV logistics. As more and more players use this multifaceted space, the danger we could be heading towards a wild west with no one winning. Despite the huge dependence on the curbside and these changing demands, policies ruling this space have remained largely unchanged since the Road Traffic Act in 1984. We currently have a curbside that is misunderstood and not aligned to user needs. Non-conformity is the norm and parking fines are seen as a cost of doing business. Extra miles are driven by people looking for parking spaces or loading bays. This means more carbon, more pollution and inefficiency. People are avoiding active travel options due to the fear of injury when riding next to the curbside, and meaning more car use and more congestion. Technological solutions are developing at a rapid pace to solve such problems and are being trialled across the country. However, there's no central alignment. We could be heading to a disjointed nation with bespoke solutions developed across the country, so when a Nottingham resident tries to navigate the streets of Liverpool, they find themselves confused and unsure how to use the curbside. This will result in further non-conformity, increased congestion and frustration from road users and local residents. Something needs to be done, and some local authorities are taking action and developing futuristic strategies to create a curbside that meets the current and future demands. But again, there's no central guidance. Many of these authorities are London boroughs, however, this is a nationwide issue. A well-managed curbside has the potential to improve not only the transport sector, but create social benefits to boost local businesses, such as shops and restaurants. The curbside should be designed to serve all users and stakeholders, where the space adapts and adjusts to meet the demand, where users have a clear understanding of the rules and the costs of using the curbside are fair and payments are easy. Think about how the curb could be adapted throughout the day to support a loading bay in the morning, cargo bike delivery bay in the afternoon, a restaurant dining in the evening, and a taxi rank at night. Many solutions have low capital and operational costs with minimal infrastructure requirements and have the ability to be scaled at pace, meaning a better user experience and better and more predictable revenue for authorities. From the transport sector alone, the benefits could be huge. With a well-managed curbside, we have the opportunity to reduce congestion on our streets, reduce tailpipe emissions, encourage active travel, and increase electric vehicle uptake. Developments are happening at pace in how we plan for our future smarter streets. This includes the new Smart Street Manual launched by TTF and the Connected Places Catapult on the 27th of April this year. A senior civil servant within DfT commented on this and rightly explained that the coming 10 years will see a change in our transport that we haven't seen before in our lifetimes, and we'll need to have the skills to be ready to react to this. Although I agree with this statement, I would say that reacting is not enough. We need to be taking active steps to support the need coming. The curbside may be a forgotten piece of national infrastructure that is critical to the successful rollout of these future solutions, transport and otherwise. The curbside needs a leader and a committed group of individuals to drive change. Local solutions are required, but built on solid national foundations. A well-managed curbside could level up transport and all other uses of this critical national space that we all depend on. It's for these reasons that I believe the curbside management should be the next in-depth inquiry topic for the Transport Select Committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Firstly, just a question of clarification.
Yep.
Are you envisaging this policy for all roads, including quiet residential housing estate roads, or is it principally for town and city centres, arterial routes and the like?
I think there's a need across the whole country, from quiet rural streets to major cities and towns as well. I think that the challenges you get are different in those spaces, and the solutions need to be bespoke for those different areas, but not confusing when you're travelling between one and the other. If you think about the sort of challenges you get in rural spaces when you have schools, for example, you have big surge of parents and children moving around to and from that space on different modes of transport. You also have sort of tourist honeypot sites where attract large amounts of visitors on nice sunny summer's day, but not at other times of the year. So a way that allows for dynamic and adaptive ways of managing the space these people are moving to and having to park or interact near would really benefit all aspects of the country.
And just you touched on and articulated your call for central guidance from the government on this. But how do you balance that with what will be very different solutions in different places around the country? What would work in my Newtown constituency of Milton Keynes would be very different from, you know, a cathedral city where the street design is very different. How do you balance that central policy with local adaptability?
Absolutely, and the policy would need to be carefully managed so it isn't isn't ruling too much in favour of sort of major towns or certain types of problems that certain towns have. So it would need to be the idea within this is that would develop a foundation for local solutions to be developed across. So we have a common approach across the country, but we've got individual solutions developed for the needs of particular places. So it means that when people are travelling from different towns, cities or rural areas, they understand the basic principles of engagement with the curbside and how it can be used, but they may need to have these bespoke solutions for those areas.
Okay, Ben, you want to
are there any examples of good practice either overseas or in this country already?
There are, both nationally and internationally. So there are solutions being trialled in sort of Harrogate, Dorset and some London boroughs as well. And internationally, Bellevue in the US and Dublin in Ireland as well are all trialling different types of solutions and technologies. Some are focused on more the back-end stuff and how the local authorities manage the space and manage their internal management of it. Others are looking at how technology can be deployed on the street to support the user interacting with that street, knowing where parking space is available, for example, or charging points for electric vehicles. So I think there's various places around the country and around the world that are trialling these things that we can learn lessons from. And I think one thing that would be great, which there's no central management for at the moment, is there are lots of trials and testing going on in this country for different solutions, but no central body is pulling together lessons from these to how we can develop better strategies going forward for the country as a whole.
Is that because it doesn't come under sort of either all the Department of Transport or communities or local authorities? Is that part of the problem, that it's kind of it falls over a number of both local and national government responsibilities? I
think that's the thing with this curbside space, that it is potentially this thing that people forget about and neglect. As I mentioned earlier, it's a thing that's used by everyone, and even if you don't leave the house, you're impacted by it from your deliveries that are going to your local supermarket, for example. But it sort of sits in this space of everyone knows it's there and uses it, but who owns it? Yeah. Not sure.
And finally, I mean, we've had a number of bids for other inquiries that would, on the surface, have a fair amount of overlap with the curbside. One was on parking, obviously, and then the last one just now on modal shift, for which the use of the curbside is clearly relevant. How would you see, I mean, if we decided to, not do a standalone one on the curbside, but to amalgamate it with one or other, where would you see the fit being best, if at all?
Yeah, I think because so many different modes of transport, and not even modes of transport, as I say, those sort of social benefits for dining and just meeting friends on the street have an impact on that. If we had two running in parallel, I think they could really benefit from each other. If sort of the modal shift, for example, having impact, doing a deeper dive into that subject and how that solution can be affected by or supported by our curbside policies as well. I think they can really work together.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Jack.
Thank you, Chair. And as you've said here, the current approach is set out in the Road Traffic Act and through the TRO process. What are your concerns about how the current TRO process works?
I think the current TRO process is quite static, so if you want to make dynamic changes to that, for example, when I mentioned earlier, when you have events running in urban or rural spaces, or like a nice sunny day and everyone floods to the beach, for example, if you could deploy dynamic curbside management practices for those particular days or those events, it would mean that these small towns by the coast, for example, don't get flooded with everyone coming to them, don't know where to park, don't know how to use this space, and end up parking illegally or parking on pavements or disrupting sort of the local town itself. So if you can have better management in how these places can be adapted, because sort of seaside towns are fairly empty or just have local residents in these spaces during sort of dark winter months, and in summer months they attract huge amounts of people.
So do you think that the TRO process is not responsive enough to sort of the needs of road users, passengers, pavement users?
Yeah, that's it. And some of the trials happening in London, just over the river actually, is how we can have these dynamic management platforms. So there's an electronic screen essentially, which instead of having this on a metal plaque which dictates who can use this bay at certain times of the day, it's an electronic screen which can adapt for different parts of the day. And it also gives you the ability to reserve the loading bay. So if you are making local deliveries to that section, you can reserve that loading bay so you know when you turn up that it's going to be there for you. And also, if you're wanting to use that, you know that someone might be coming in the next half an hour, for example.
And in terms of, we've obviously heard a lot of concerns from a number of disability charities, and particularly from those charities representing people with sight loss and partially sighted people. Have you thought about the impact on people with a disability or who are partially sighted of these proposals?
Yeah, and I think lots of the non-conformity we get at the moment with sort of people parking halfway on pavements, all the way on pavements, parking in the wrong space they shouldn't be, and have a real impact on those people that are less abled and potentially less sighted. So I think if we had a better way of managing these and allowing people to use this curbside how it's designed for in the first place, it will have the impact on those people looking for this parking space, but also the people using the footways as well. And when I talk about the curbside, I encompass the footways and a section of the roadway itself. So it's not just that strip of concrete that sort of splits the footpath and the road, but the space either side as well.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, Ruth.
Yes, thank you. There's a lot to think about there, and the obvious one where we've got conflict and cross-party support in Parliament for doing something about is the default, people looking for a default parking ban on pavements in the same way we have in London, and we're getting pushback from DFT, it appears, from that. Do you think the biggest blocks are legislation or culture or lack of strategy? What are the major barriers to thinking more proactively about curbside use at the moment?
I think one of the major problems at the moment, what we mentioned earlier, is that there's no clear owner for this. It's that forgotten space that impacts all these things, but no one wants to drive it forward. And I think one of the main sort of objectives I'd like for the committee to do is make this heard more in wider government, to make it people understand more about the importance of this space.
Okay. And when we think of curbside, we think of that physical at the edge of the footway and the beginning of the carriageway. One is supposed to be for pedestrians and the other is supposed to be for vehicles, but there are plenty of instances I can think of where the pedestrian environment would be better if there wasn't that rigid divide, because there's too much space for vehicles and not enough for pedestrians, or there's too little flexibility in order to allow for one that is used a lot and one that is merely for movement, occasional movement. So how rigid are you about the definition of curbside, or are you prepared to be or is the thinking, does it allow for that flexibility?
I think that would be another thing for the in-depth inquiry as to what space do we need to be worrying about. So do we need to be worrying about more the footpaths, more just that strip of granite between the two paved areas, or do we need to take it much broader? And I think the sort of strategies that the Borough of Lambeth in London have come up with for their future curbside strategy really encompass a really broad area in that, and have some great sort of future views and images for that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, have any other? Yep.
Just reflecting on what you're talking about there, and well, I think in any sort of area that we look at, what you're looking for is bang for your buck. You're looking to see where you can make the biggest difference. And it's very much, to me, smells like something that in the higher density areas, that's where you'd make the biggest difference. But earlier on you talked about it being more all-encompassing. So in terms of a focus, am I right in thinking that the inquiry should be really focused on the high density traffic areas?
I think that the issues are magnified in urban areas just because of the density of people and traffic and all different modes of transport. In cities you get a collation of many more modes of transport than you do in sort of urban areas. So I think the issues are magnified there. So if there wants to be more of a focus, then maybe some of the challenges in more urban areas could be looked at to start with, and then it could be broadened out to more rural areas if that was appropriate, sort of beyond that potentially.
Yeah, I think one of my concerns with any sort of review of legislation, etc., is that we try to do things that's everything for everybody, when there are actually big differences between the environments that you're trying to
Rural areas probably would like to have that occur because they'd like to have footways.
No,
rural areas don't even have footways.
No, I'm thinking of a small village that barely has anybody walking up and down the high street, and you're trying to regulate it when you've got the difference where your parking measures and things like that over in Lambeth. It's absolutely a focus that would make a massive difference. And it's just understanding those differentials. I agree with the gaps in payments and things like that.
Right. Thank you very much. Time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you again for your time and presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. And if we could invite our fourth